Hello, and welcome back to another episode of me, Jacob Nickpon. Today we're going to be attacking a different topic. We're not going to be talking about Neanderthals today. We're going to be specifically talking about pyramids in Sudan, the Kush Empire, and specifically giving credit to the existence of the Kush, along with their culture, and relating them to the Nubians, that they actually built their own pyramids, that the Kush Empire built their own pyramids. And we're going to be talking about subjects relating to their taking over of the Egyptian Empire and what they obtained from Egypt itself, culturally and in their practices. So you may be wondering, why giving credit? Well, what is so important about giving credit here? The reason is because this video is going to be underlined with giving an understanding of what pseudo-archaeologists are claiming and rebuttaling those claims. One such claim is made by a YouTuber named Jimmy Corsetti, specifically in a video titled, "You Won't Believe What's Buried Under the Sahara, Hidden Lost Ancient Civilizations." In around 15 minutes and 30 seconds, he shows a picture of the pyramids that we'll be observing today, and starts depicting them as, we don't know how they got there, we don't know the civilization that built them, somewhere along those lines. And it's really interesting because we know who built them, we know why, we know how, we know why and what style. So there's a lot of information, and I'll be providing you with a little bit of information about how those pyramids got there and who built them and who those people were. So let's begin. So to begin this first segment, I wanted to talk about where I'm obtaining my information from. The person I'm referring to for my information on this first segment is going to be by the name of Bob Breyer. He published his journal in the journal called Archaeology, and his segment is titled The Other Pyramids. I'm going to be referring to pages 54 through 58. So what is one thing that always intrigued me about Sudan is how many pyramids it actually has. As a student studying archaeology and history, I never really knew about this glamorous amount of pyramids that Sudan actually has within its borders. And even if we refer to the old empire, the Kush Empire, which we're going to be referring to throughout the whole video, they themselves also have more pyramids than the Egyptians. And also they had the Egyptian pyramids under their control for a certain amount of time as well during the 25th dynasty. So there is possible reasons behind why we talk so much about Egypt and not about the Sudan pyramids, even though Sudan has so many more pyramids than Egypt and the country with the most pyramids within its borders. And the main possible reason behind this is most likely due to geographical location of Sudan. The land isn't as accessible, or wasn't as accessible, to European explorers and physicians at the time, which were one of the first to actually go to explore and publish work, more like they're bringing back stolen loot from those countries. And that happened in the 19th century and 20th century. So that inaccessibility to that region could be a really big reason to our understanding of the region itself. For a long time, we didn't really know what was going on, and the Nubian people, the Kush Empire, was cut off for a vast amount of time, basically until the Roman attacks in the year around 300, in the 3rd century AD, 4th century AD, and until Christianity hit in around the same time frame, which I'll be mentioning later on in the video as well. So I wanted to give credit to an American archaeologist called George Rainsner, as we really did not know the real reason behind the purpose of the pyramids until his excavations in 1916. And you may be wondering, as I've stated previously, there were excavations done in the 1840s and 1850s, and yes, they were there. It's hard to call them excavations. It's more of looting. But I will be referring further to those excavations later on in the video. But obviously, archaeological practices have changed over time, and in that 50, 60 years, in that time frame, it was able to develop so much where we were able to get a different contextual understanding of the pyramids. So thanks to these excavations in 1916, we were able to finally formally change our understanding of what the pyramids were actually purposed to do, and change them from Egyptian-style pyramids to their own cultural-style pyramids. So before we get into that, let's understand what Nubia actually is, the understanding of where the names came from. So Nubia is a relatively modern name, introduced nearly 2,000 years ago by Greek geographer Strabo, who met members of the Nubia tribe and decided they call their country Nubia. Pretty simple. The Egyptians from millennia called the region Tasati, land of the bow, due to their famous archers. And the ancient Egyptians actually held control over Nubian people who constantly had to pay tribute. And in some cases, Nubians actually went to fight for Egypt instead of paying tribute, and fought along the ranks so they could gain prestige within the Egyptian empire itself, since it held control over their country. But once the Egyptian empire hit a decline, the Nubians gained their own autonomy, and eventually conquering Egypt itself. The person, the Kushite king that did that, was by the name of Piei, who was an ancient Kushite king, as I said, and he was the founder of the 25th dynasty of Egypt. They did not shy away from adopting the Egyptian traditions, and they still were worshipped as pharaohs. And he ruled Egypt from 744 to 714 BC. So now, after getting a little bit of understanding of the background information of the region and its connection to Egypt, let's talk about the architectural differences as well. So one of the greatest differences is the angles of the pyramids. The Nubian ones were around 68 to 77 degrees, while the Egyptian ones were no greater than 52 degrees. This is a significant difference, and we can visually see it as well. This isn't one of those facts that we can just say and be like, oh, that's kind of cool. We physically and visually can see these differences on a hard scale. Other significant differences from the pyramids of Nubia and Egypt are going to be the actual height. So on average, Nubian pyramids were around 100 feet. The greatest one, I believe, to be 142 feet, while the Pyramid of Giza itself is around 400 feet. We see that even the largest Nubian pyramid does not really compare when it comes to height. And this is something that I have seen through different historical time frames. We see this in China, occurring with the Han and Qin dynasty when it comes to terracotta warriors. We see how the Han have completely changed to the Qin when it comes to the size. Obviously, the terracotta warriors that are also famous just as much as the Pyramid of Giza, their size is obviously human-like. It's the size of humans. While the Han dynasty ended up doing a lot more statues, but at a lot smaller size. So it's actually really intriguing when you start seeing the economical importance and the change of different empires, how they start swaying when economy starts playing a role. And that is one reason behind why Egypt also stopped building its pyramids, is because of the economical impact it actually had on the region. So let's talk about the actual use of these pyramids. We honestly know that in Egypt, the pyramids are used have burial chambers within them. But here in Sudan, the Nubian pyramids do not. They are not within the actual pyramids themselves. The burial chamber is actually done first. It's under the pyramid in most cases. So what does that mean? That means that the pyramid has to be erected after the death of the king or queen or nobility. So what's also intriguing is that means that whoever the nobility is has to have a descendant with good relations to them. Otherwise, they will not erect them a pyramid. So it also shows you the importance of leaving a good impact of yourself on the people who are coming after you, or you might leave yourself without a pyramid. So it's really intriguing in the cultural differences. While in Egypt, we see the difference where the pyramids are being erected for the pharaohs while the pharaohs are still alive, so that when they do pass, they are able to go into the pyramids for their resting place, while the pyramids in Sudan were erected after. Pretty intriguing cultural difference there. So I have mentioned the use of terracotta warriors by the Han and Qin dynasties. What's really intriguing is that we do see the same kind of practice here. As the terracotta warriors are meant to go with their generals to further on into the afterlife, we have the same thing here in Egypt and by the Nubian people, but through a different way, not warriors, through servants. We do see this practice also being prevalent in comparison to Egypt, as Nubian, we believe that the practice was adopted from Egyptian culture by the Nubians. And we do have evidence of this, of servant statues being placed with the people that are being buried for the afterlife. One specific case we have here is Taharaka's tomb, where there was around 1,000 of these Ushabitis placed with him, and the Ushabitis is going to be those servant statues. And I do apologize if I'm mispronouncing, but I'm attempting. So this next segment, I want to talk about these excavations that occurred in 1834 and the importance that it did actually have on the Nubian culture becoming prevalent in our society today. So, who can we credit with being one of the first people to really excavate, quote unquote, in Sudan? That person, coincidentally, can be Giuseppe Ferlimini. Why do I say coincidentally? We don't really know. Well, first of all, I did say that archaeological methods have changed through time. And this is obviously more of just kind of finding some burial and retrieving it and bringing it back home. But he did coincidentally end up discovering that there is a difference between Egyptian culture and Nubian culture located in Sudan. So what did he do? Who was he? He was a treasure hunter physician. Really intriguing title, I know. Probably not a job title that you could go for today, but you can always try. But he ended up getting permission to excavate in Sudan and headed there in 1834. And after some unfortunate events, which are really intriguing, I read about them in a little bit, and I believe there is some credible sources out there that you can read about this, but I will not go dive too deep into it, as it's not part of the tale that I will be telling. But he ended up, all of his camels in his expedition ended up dying, and he ended up having to fight off with his crew lions. And a pretty cool tale. But it would be a really good read if you would find some good sources, as my source also mentions a little bit of as well. But he ended up heading to Merore, which is historically a really important site for us, for the Kusite Empire, and for Nubian people, as it was one of the last capitals before its fall. Where he ended up finding a vast amount of jewelry, to amounts that I've never seen before, besides in Egypt. From the tomb of Queen, and I am sorry again if I mispronounce, Amashkelheto. And at first, his findings didn't seem credible, as Egyptian jewelry was basically seen as the credibility, the comparison of the region. If it's not Egyptian, then it's not real. And there was nothing really ever seen like it before. So no one really knew that Nubians had their own style in jewelry, as they obviously have their own culture. So there's many different things that the Nubian people have when it comes to their pyramids, when it comes to their jewelry, which is really interesting. And is one of those things that does need to be credited to them. They are separate from the Egyptian Empire, but obviously they have that love-hate relationship that we can see through wars and through conflicts, and obviously through pharaohs, as obviously one of the Nubian Kusite kings ended up becoming a pharaoh in Egypt. But when German Egyptologist Richard Lepsius, returned from his 1840 expedition in Sudan, he vouched for the Nubians to have their own style of jewelry, as he discovered the same thing. So it eventually led to Giuseppe Ferlimini to be credited with finding the first style of Nubian jewelry, which is honestly really intriguing, because he probably didn't intend on doing so, but coincidentally he did. And that is something really important, because that ended up changing Nubian history forever, as from that moment on, we were aware of the different styles that they did have, basically giving them their own agency in history. Finally, after so much time of not having that credibility of having their own distinctive culture. So, as obviously you can tell, since it took so long to even the 1840s to finally understand that the Nubians had their own culture, that they existed separately, we can tell why this understanding of Nubian pyramids being separated from Egyptian is so prevalent even in modern culture. So the sad ending, how did this all come to an end? How did the Nubian Empire, the Kusite Empire, come to an end? Well, the region was really out of contact after losing the region of Egypt with majority of the rest of the world and Egypt itself. And it continued its pyramid building constructions, its projects, until eventually around 300 and 350 AD with Roman attacks, and ended up declining. And in 350 AD is also when Christianity starting to become prevalent in the region as well, which coincidentally ended up opening it up to the world, and it couldn't be so isolated anymore. So around that same time, one of the last pyramids in Africa was built by the king of Meroe, as I've stated before, an important capital in the region. And it represents the last flame of pyramid building in Africa that began almost 3,000 years earlier. Really sad moment. The region to have the most pyramids, also to build the last one. Adopting it from Egyptian culture to make it their own with their own unique styles. But it doesn't end there. We archaeologists have discovered some really intriguing things. I have stated before that there was an architectural difference of pyramids. But what if I tell you that there's a completely different style of pyramids than what I even said before? Those were the most grand pyramids for the Nubians. The larger in Meroe, which I've shown and depicted in pictures, which you probably see in front of you currently. And there's many different regions in Sudan that have those same style of pyramids. But archaeologists have discovered some really intriguing factors that play a completely different role on the history of the region. And what are they? A completely different style of pyramid. I've talked about the angles being completely different. I'm talking about the heights, but we have discovered a whole new style that wasn't previously known. And it's understandable why after I say what it is. But let's talk about why. Why did the Nubians change their style? Because this style changed around the 300 ADs. And why did they do this? From excavations at Sadigina, 450 miles from Meroe, the practice of building demonstrative pyramids trickled down from royal to wealthy elite, much more extensively than previously believed. Because there was a culture of only having noble people, nobility, to have pyramids. It was a taboo to have anyone besides nobility to have a pyramid. And the social construct of pyramids had been transformed, and wealth started to play as the main factor in the discussion. So it's really intriguing to see the fall from around 350 AD and this transformation at the same time. So we move away from this nobility, as obviously they're on the downfall, and the wealthy elites can now play a factor in these pyramids. But what are these pyramids that we're talking about? These pyramids, as you see, are in front of you now. Really intriguing, small-sized pyramids. One of them even being only 30 inches in diameter. So these style pyramids are completely different. And the reason is because anyone can now erode a pyramid for themselves. So obviously the burial being under the pyramid and the pyramid being erected on top of the burial. Obviously the size isn't so grand, but that's not necessary. These wealthy elites can afford to make these small pyramids, and they still are symbolic in many ways. But this just shows you how archaeologists, even in modern day, are still discovering many things. So the one thing that Jimmy Corsetti says as a pseudo-archaeologist that is correct is that yes, we still have so much to discover as archaeologists. But we are aware of that fact. And it changes history all the time. But we are aware of who we can credit this information to. We know these pyramids are credited to the Nubian people, to the Kushite Empire, and we know the history of the region. So, discovering new things does not mean we find a new ancient civilization. It just means that we have discovered something completely different and something completely new and interesting about, in this case, the Kushites and the Nubian people. The source for my information for the miniature pyramids comes from Eric Powell, who also published in the journal Archaeology in volume 66. And the title was Miniature Pyramids of Sudan, and I was referring to pages 30 through 34. I'm hoping this video was informative for you guys. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope this was a good short introduction to who the Sudan pyramids can be attributed to, and a little bit of information about the Kushite and the Nubian people. Let me know if you guys have any cool ideas to talk about for the next video, and I'll definitely try to get back to you guys soon. Take care and Happy New Year!